This is the Analysis in Chains with Nathan Williams and Neil Kieran.
Welcome to Analysis in Chains. I'm Nathan Williams. Joining me today is James Orbison, the head of business development at Cypherium. They're based in New York. Cypherium is a JavaScript-based permissionless blockchain that uses a hybrid consensus mechanism. So they've got the enterprise private chain version, and then they've got the public blockchain similar to Ethereum or Bitcoin. And thank you very much for coming on the show, James.
Thanks for having me, Nathan. It's good to be with you.
I want to talk a bit about this because the idea of a hybrid chain seems to be one I encounter more and more, that there are certain problems that can be addressed with private chains, certain problems that can be addressed with public chains. Tell me, what is your guys' thought process for developing a hybrid consensus mechanism or a hybrid blockchain?
Well, it's sort of our approach to solving the issues that we find in our space, having to trade off between values, between scalability and decentralization, between security and speed. And so our chain is a hybrid consensus mechanism, which means it employs both proof of work and practical Byzantine fault tolerance in our consensus mechanism.
Practical Byzantine fault tolerance is one of the... how would you describe that? How would you explain that to our listeners?
It's a consensus method that was developed in the Bitcoin NG and Bizcoin protocols. It's a method of communication between the nodes that essentially requires a 2/3 quorum of a particular voting committee to accept history into the ledger. And we use it because it is really expedient, and it allows us, in addition to our proof of work mechanism, which we can get a little bit more into, to process transactions immediately and gives us a really high throughput.
Now, when you're talking about a permissionless blockchain, how does that work when you have a private chain model? Like, can people join a private chain or the enterprise side just by downloading the software and starting to mine?
So there are two sort of separate concepts. There's the private chain or consortium chains, like Ethereum Enterprise, which might be used for businesses or for any kind of enterprise that needs to have complete control over their data sets. And that's a pretty separate endeavor from participating in a public and transparent blockchain, a permissionless blockchain that anyone can sort of participate in. And so that is a permissioned blockchain. Our public blockchain, our permissionless blockchain, uses proof of work so that it allows anyone to participate, like Bitcoin or Ethereum. The classic private chains would be, like R3 Corda or Hyperledger. That's who Cypherium Enterprise sort of addresses their shortcomings, and so we offer both solutions depending on the needs of the particular user.
Now, your mainnet, is it up and running yet for the public chain? Can I start mining tomorrow?
Well, maybe not tomorrow, but in in the near future. The testnet is fully launched, and there's tutorials on our website on how to start playing with it. But the mainnet and the mining specs are forthcoming. We expect that those are our immediate next steps, and we expect them pretty soon.
Now, with a mining model, right, with a permissionless public consensus, I mean, it's pretty clear that there's benefit to having new systems like what you're working on that will attempt to address some of the shortcomings in Bitcoin or Ethereum. But I guess what I want to know is how hard is it to enter the market when so many existing mining pools are out there? Is there a danger of 51% attacks and things like that when you're trying to launch a permissionless level one blockchain in a world where everyone's got mining rigs?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's not as much of a danger with 51% attacks with our blockchain. But so let me just take your question in two separate ways. First is the market oversaturated with protocols, and second is am I getting this right? That is is that market oversaturated with protocols? The more that it's crowded, the more susceptible all the protocols become to malicious miners.
Yeah, sort of. I think what I'm getting at is that Bitcoin is the grandfather, and when it got started, it was with a few people that could mine on CPUs. And it has since evolved such that there are large mining pools that have ASIC specialized computer hardware for doing trillions of hashes a second in order to try and take advantage of the mining rewards and to get some Bitcoins. Now, when someone is making a new blockchain, you're not coming in to a world where people only have CPUs. You're coming into a world where if you start attracting a lot of attention, people might be able to turn on all of their mining rigs over to you. The question is, how do you prevent that, or how do you make sure that you're able to launch in sort of a stable and sustainable way as you gain attention?
Proof of work coins are traditionally, because they're non-resistant to ASIC chips, it's easy for them to be taken advantage of. And so, second generation, if that term resonates at all, blockchains abandoning proof of work in order to combat that, but that only leads to more centralization and increased vulnerability like we've seen. And so the best step forward for new blockchains, and this will ultimately, I think, lead to the crux of the question. The best step forward for new blockchains is to hybridize, the effective proof of work to maintain their decentralization, and to use protocols like ours, practical Byzantine fault tolerance, that render 51% attacks impossible. That is it is literally impossible to do a 51% attack on a protocol like ours. And so I don't think ultimately that the market is oversaturated with protocols because of those vulnerabilities, that the newest protocols exist because we are not living in a decentralized world that we all envision.
No, I think it makes sense, and I guess there have been other other groups that have tried to address this just by making their protocol or their algorithm ASIC resistant, or requiring memory intensive operations like Monero did. But this idea of incorporating sort of a hybrid model to make sure that there are I'm making an assumption. Do you mean by a hybrid model that you have to have both the input of the permission chain and the proof of work chain in order to create the next block?
Yeah, so how our hybrid consensus model works is that it decouples the mining process into two separate actions. There's minting, the mining process traditionally in Bitcoin and Ethereum. There's minting, and then there's verifying. And we think that a lot of people in the space take for granted that those two things need to necessarily be wedded because they are in Bitcoin, but our chain separates those two things into two different actions. So proof of work chain that we use, it's a dual chain structure. The proof of work chain that we use mints the coins, that there's a proof of work contest to elect a leader node, which is an open and permissionless contest to elect the leader node who fills blocks and writes the history of the ledger. And then there is a validator committee assembled from that proof of work contest who then vote in a 2/3 quorum to accept transactions or verify transactions in the ledger. And that gives us while maintaining the decentralization, it makes us ASIC resistant, and it allows us to process transactions really fast. Our test net is working at an average of 2,500 transactions per second, and our maximum speeds are 5,000. And so that's the kind of advantage that hybridization of a consensus mechanism can deliver.
You think that hybridization is going to be the future? Is that it's going to move into the space of Bitcoin and Ethereum are now? Or do you think that this is just one of many use cases that's going to, or one of many models that's going to be in the blockchains of the future?
Yeah, I do think that it is a kind of wave of the future, because there is so much problem solving that happens as the space progresses, and that this is really, hybridization is a method of problem solving at its core. That you want to take the good with the bad of all these projects, and a lot of these projects taken together give you, or if not projects, then white papers or ideas that permeate the space, taken together, offer solutions to one another, that they talk to each other, and that good projects will be good participants and listeners in this big community.
I've been talking to a lot of people recently who have cooled off toward the idea of a utility token. That the idea of doing an ICO or any unbacked token that's protocol only, uh, they're not as convinced as they were maybe in 2017. What is your opinion? Do you think that that utility tokens make sense, or that we're going to move to more security-driven models?
I think that we're finding out that the landscape was always a bit more skewed towards the security token than we were imagining. I think a lot of people were selling utility tokens as security tokens, or selling security tokens as utilities. But no, there will always be a space for utility tokens. I mean, they sort of give birth to security tokens, in that security tokens, for tokens to operate as securities, there needs to be sort of an underlying network that has that must be participated in order for those securities to run on top of them.
Hmm. I think you do have a point. One of the things that has been on my mind is this idea that if we want to see mass adoption, we'll probably need to see corporates come into the blockchain space, and that means corporate purchasing of digital assets. But most of the corporates that I talk to, the number one concern isn't the fact that they're buying tokens or that they would need to buy tokens to use a certain protocol. It's more that the value of the tokens is unstable,
Right.
and so they're nervous about having them on their books for purposes of payment, or for purposes of holding. It's very difficult to estimate their cost of using a system. What sort of things do you think need to be done in order to get corporates or businesses to take the plunge into using decentralized networks and crypto models?
Well, I think that there's a certain amount of economic growth that needs to happen, and by growth I don't mean like booming. I mean sort of shrinking in a lot of instances. A lot of economic pains, or just maturity of the market. But we're really focused on the technological aspects of that adoption, and so for us that means having protocols that are able to process transactions in the way that that we're accustomed to in the contemporary enterprise landscape. So that means we need protocols unlike Bitcoin, which processes like 7 transactions per second, or Ethereum, which can go up to 15 or something like that. That we need things that can compete with Visa and MasterCard, processing thousands of transactions per second. And that's true across industries, that there's standards already set up that I think in addition to the stabilization of pricing or markets, that will make the waters more appealing for corporations, or for institutions to dive in.
Well, I think that brings us back to the whole utility of a hybrid model, because a lot of the things that you describe are sort of in conflict with each other, right? Like if Ethereum and Bitcoin are slow, 7 transactions, 15 transactions a second, but that's sort of the reason why they're secure. And, uh, you know, I'm not sure if there's one solution necessarily that can solve the specific problems of security and solve the specific problem of needing to move faster without having a trade-off somewhere else, like increased centralization.
No, I was just thinking that there's, that's going to remain true. We sort of tend to forget in this industry that should be true to a certain extent, that there is kind of specialization in any. We wouldn't want there to be some kind of like single entity that like ruling over all the computing in the world, that like there should be big computers that specialize in slow moving and secure transactions. There should be really fast computers. There should be computers that fit in your pocket and that are generative of particular kinds of applications. And so I think that'll remain true, but that's maybe not necessarily a terrible thing.
No, I agree with you. I think that one of the reasons that this is such an exciting space for me, it always has been, is that in spite of the fact that there was a bubble, we all see there was a bubble, and the bubble has burst, that underneath it, there is a core technology that has the potential to fundamentally change the way we all operate or underpin anything that we do. And it's the same way that the internet started, a huge bubble that eventually burst, but still today, 30 years later, we end up having core technology that is integrated into all of our lives. So what do you think needs to happen over the next 5 years for blockchains to really take that role, underpinning so many aspects of our life?
Well, I think that in addition to so we sort of touched on the market stability and the technological stability, but I think there needs to be a kind of just maturing of public opinion, where if someone knows the term blockchain, then there's a kind of still kind of eye rolling going on outside of our industry.
A little bit.
And that, and that needs to, I think that's true of any big sort of momentous, when anyone's crying that it's a big momentous change, that there's going to be some kind of I don't know, skepticism or downplaying that needs to just balance out. So yeah, I would say that sentiment is the sort of third piece outside of market stability and technological improvement.
So bringing it back to Cypherium, what can we expect from you guys in the coming few months?
Yeah, so we are going to, a lot of stuff is going to come from us in the coming months. We expect to release our full yellow paper along with our mining specifications and our full mainnet. The test net's out now, but we still haven't released a public mainnet with that people can interact with and build on, and really excited about that. I mean, our virtual machine, which runs our smart contracts, is built in Java, which you said at the start. And that's really exciting for us because I think that Java has the biggest developer community in the world, and so unlike interacting with Ethereum Solidity, which is a pretty specified coding language, it'll allow tons of people outside of the blockchain space to start investigating what it means to develop in the blockchain space as just knowing Java, and so I think that'll be a big step forward as our project releases in the coming months. We're excited to see how the legacy developer community steps into the space, and we hope that our virtual machine might be a way for them to do that.
That sounds really good, James, and it's refreshing to talk with someone that's doing a primary layer protocol like this. If I wanted to get started mining, what would I do?
You would have to keep your ear to the ground for when we release those specs, but it's Yeah, we're excited for that to happen. I think that it'll be, you won't need some super specialized equipment.
Could I do it
and
on
that,
my computer? Or?
I think so, yeah. And we're excited for cloud mining to be a big cornerstone of our mining community. But yeah, stay tuned for the full specs.
Sounds good. Thank you very much, James, for coming on the show. James is the head of business development for Cypherium. You can find out more at, what's the URL?
Cypherium.io.
Cypherium.io, cypherium.io. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks a lot, Nathan.